Hello again, comic book fans. Welcome back to another edition of Comic Book Geezers. I'm Wild Bill the Unknown Comic, your host, and my partner in crime here.
I'm Pete, guys. How are you? Thanks for joining us. We are actually going to do a show today that was requested by a couple readers, or a couple viewers, I should say. And it's probably something we should have done at the very beginning of this show.
Wasn't thinking of it.
We didn't think about it, but we're going to talk about
the origins of Comic Book Geezers. How did we get started?
Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about how we got into comics, what some of our first comic acquisitions were, what we were into when we were kids, and then also we're going to talk about how we met, the kind of the history of
since you guys want to know.
Yeah, and how we kind of got here
thank
today.
Thank you. Kind of flattering, I suppose.
Yeah.
It's weird talking to a camera and not seeing you on the other side, but we know you're out there because we see your comments. We appreciate your comments. Thank you. Which, like Pete said, this is what motivated this episode. So we both were growing up in the late 60s, early 70s when as kids and comics were around and they were cheap and affordable. They were considered periodicals, disposables.
Available at your local newspaper stand. That's
every deli and anything that sold newspapers or magazines also sold comics. And they were there, taken for granted. And they didn't last long either. They were cycled through. Like you wondered where the old issues went. They weren't bought. Where did they go?
Is your memory of how many? I was thinking about this the other day. I wonder how many issues of each, or how many copies of each issue would they stock in certain places?
I guess they bought you never knew how many came in each box, but they had lots of them. They would be stacks. You'd see them on the floor in boxes. So maybe they came out in boxes of 100 or whatever. But whatever wasn't sold went back. But anyway, speaking of comics, so I had a lot of comics given to me by my Uncle Johnny when I was a kid before I could read. So when I was 12, we moved. I had a stack of 70 comics, but most of them were corny Superboys, a couple Archies. There wasn't a lot of superhero stuff. My favorite was an Iron Man 18, which had no cover. I didn't bring that.
The famous no-cover Iron Man.
Yes,
right?
That's my sentimental value comic because I could look at that book without reading it and understand the story. So that Iron Man is what got me hooked. So we moved. Throughout my comics was a stack 75, like I said, and most of them were in bad shape anyway. So anyway, a year and a half later, I started collecting comics, and I bought these three. I saw these three in the local supermarket. Hulk 213, Iron Man 100, and Thor 261. So these three comics, I walked up to my mother and asked her if she could buy these for me. These were 30-cent covers. At the time, though, comics were 35 cents. I did not know that. I thought they were 30. So for three comics for 90 cents, my mom, with her good heart and nature, bought them for me.
Sprung out the single.
Yeah.
Here you go, little Billy.
So I read this Iron Man and loved it. The Hulk was amazing. I'd never read either character. Obviously, I recognized Iron Man right away when I opened it up from the book that I couldn't read with the no cover when I was a kid. But Thor didn't like it. It was like reading Shakespeare. Awesome cover. Great action on the inside, but at 13 years old, it was like reading Shakespeare with "Thou art boring me." I just didn't like his lingo, but now I love it.
Ironically, we both felt the same way, and ironically, now we're both totally into Thor, especially myself. So
another character I was exposed to, which probably got thrown out, was Daredevil. So those are my core characters right there. And Spider-Man was the other guy that took Thor's place. So Daredevil, Hulk, Iron Man, and Spider-Man were the four for me.
So I actually got into comics at a lot earlier age, much earlier age than Bill. So I think I've told part of the story before. So when I was a very young kid growing up, we lived in Goshen, New York, and my grandparents on my mother's side lived on the Lower East Side of New York City, down near Chinatown, in Little Italy. And my grandparents lived in a co-op building, and next door, the apartment next door to my grandparents, lived this little old, very nice Jewish woman named Mrs. Weber. Now, Mrs. Weber had a son who, when he was a kid, had collected a lot of comics, but he had just moved out of the apartment and went off on a life of his own and left her with all these comics, right?
So she didn't want.
Right. So, but she wasn't just going to give them away or throw them away.
Nope.
But one day, because my grandmother used to always bring us over, because my brother was really little at the time. I was probably maybe 4 or 5. She would bring us over there. We'd hang out with Mrs. Weber. And one day I saw some of the comics. I said, "What are those?" She's like, "Oh, these are comic books. These were my sons. Do you like comic books?" And I was like, why not, right? So she gave me a couple comics. I'm going to show them to you in a second.
This
But
is
she
awesome.
would go, and every time we would go visit my grandparents, my grandmother would take me over there, and she would usually float me a couple comics. Got to the point where we'd go visit my grandparents, and the first thing I would say to my grandmother and my grandfather is, can we go to Mrs. Weber's house? To Mrs. Weber's
Get some
apartment. Because
free
then we get some free
comics.
comics. So the first two that she gave me
Check this out.
are these two bad boys right here.
It's that classic Kingpin.
Yes.
Is that the first appearance of Kingpin or no? But that's a great battle scene.
It is, yeah. It's a great battle.
And what's the other one? Mysterio?
This is Mysterio. Now this...
What number is that?
This is number 67. I actually had to rebuy because my old copy was so mangled. But this is the actual
I picked up
issue.
the Marvel Tales version of this
Yes.
from you, which is my oldest Marvel Tales until that other one I just showed.
Exactly.
That number 12.
This
great.
is the actual issue copy that Mrs. Weber gave me back in probably 1970.
Is that a second appearance of Mysterio? It's not a first, is it?
It's not a first, no. It's not a
But
second.
still, that's an awesome cover.
So
that's 60 and 67 or 69?
60 and 67.
Wow.
And
Look at that.
two other ones that she gave me, and again, both of these I've had to rebuy because I either traded away or they got mangled over the years. But just to show you the magnitude of the stuff that she was giving me were these two classics by Captain America.
Now this one with the tombstone, who's that? Is that the death of Bucky?
That is no, I don't think that's the death of Bucky because that's actually Jim Jones there.
Okay.
I forget what was actually going on. It's a Steranko. Both
Jim
these are
Jones
Steranko
faked me
covers.
out.
Yep. Rick Jones, not Jim Jones. Rick Jones.
Jim Jones.
Jim Jones.
Punch Party guys.
But this has long been one of my favorite covers. Never mind the fact it's a Steranko cover.
That's an awesome cover. We spoke about it many times.
But she actually gave me these.
And this said this before. This has a Batman effect.
Yes.
Cover with the eerie moon and
I had
tree.
to buy both of these. So that got me into the whole thing. Now I want to show you the first comic I ever bought on the stand with my own money.
Here we
Okay.
go.
And it was not this copy that I have here because the copy that I had was I had to buy another one. It was in such bad shape.
I have this as well.
This was the first
This is
one.
great.
And ironically, I also bought this in the same newsstand downstairs from where my grandparents lived in New York City.
It's in great shape.
Again. But
That's cool with the nuclear explosion.
And
in the
this is a
background.
holiday issue. This is like right around Christmas.
Happy holidays.
Yep.
The world's coming to an end.
Exactly.
I want to get it. You can save time on your Christmas shopping.
So, what was the year that you first started collecting?
It was around this time. It was 40 years ago. It was the fall of '78.
Fall of '78. Okay,
Yep.
so by
that's summertime. Yeah.
so
right
I
around
had
there.
collected all throughout the '70s.
That's spring, actually.
That's spring.
It was March of '78 is when I got them, but then it was like little by little over the summer. I was hanging on to them because you never used to hang on to them.
Right.
Like if there was something to be thrown out, if they were mangled, you was like, yeah, throw them out. I only kept them if I liked them before I was 12. If they looked beat up, I had no problems throwing them out. It wasn't until I was a teenager that I started collecting them and hanging on to them and taking care of them.
And ironically, by the time he was just really starting to get into heavy, I was starting to kind of weasel my way out of it. So I think by the time 1980 came around, I was kind of done.
And whereas me, as fall of '78, I was a freshman in high school, and I had been collecting for almost a year, and I was really liking Spider-Man, Iron Man, and Hulk, and I was not... You get to the point where you get so hooked on them, you were getting annoyed if you missed an issue, because then you were left out with what's going on, even though every issue goes back in the past as to what you just missed. So if you do miss a couple of issues, next couple of issues, they're going to recount what happened. Comics always had a story. They had a back burner story, what was going to develop, and then they had a front burner story, what was developing at the present. But they always went back as to what you just missed. So
Yeah.
you never really were out of the loop, even if you felt like it. So wanting to get rid of that, I subscribed. So I wound up getting a subscription to Iron Man,
never did that. I should have.
Spider-Man, and the Hulk, and it was great. They shipped the comics flat, but without a board. They just came in a brown paper bag, but they were shipped flat, and you just slid the comic out of the paper wrapper. And then the paper wrapper would get all flimsy, but it was weird how it worked. It actually kept them flat, or the mailman had enough common sense not to bend them.
How many years did you do that for?
4 years through high school. And after 3 years of Iron Man, of the three titles, Iron Man, Hulk, and Spider-Man, Marvel gave me an offer. Renew the three titles and pick a fourth one free. So I picked Daredevil as my fourth title. And it happened to be when Frank Miller was in his early stages of
Look at that.
So he was already like in his 5th issue. So I have like issue 163 through like 176 or 175, something like that, or 164 to 76 was the 12 issues of Frank Miller that I got, which was pretty good because he started in 158 with Daredevil. And that's, classic Daredevil to this day. So
would you say in your early years of collecting comics, were those your favorite characters? So Spider-Man, Hulk.
Well, I think
Iron
when I
Man.
was a kid, it was that Iron Man book for sure. But it wasn't until I read these 3, I became instantly hooked on the Hulk and instantly hooked on Iron Man. And then I was a teenager in Philly, went to a local drugstore around the corner from my grandparents' house and bought a Spider-Man off the rack. And I think that was issue 176 with or 177 with Flash Thompson on the cover.
Oh yeah.
And the shadow of the Green Goblin and
yes.
Spider-Man holding the knocked out Flash Thompson.
Yep.
Read that issue, which was phenomenal, and then that's how I got hooked on Spider-Man.
I think my early favorites, and it's changed a bit over the years, but early favorites were probably Spider-Man, Luke Cage, Man-Thing, Werewolf by Night.
Man-Thing was another one I loved.
Howard the Duck, Ghost Rider. I liked a lot of the macabre stuff, like a lot of the horror characters. Tomb of Dracula.
I had some horror comics when I was younger, but I don't remember what they were or who they were.
Iron Man, I was a fan of. The Hulk, of course, I was a fan of. But I really didn't start getting into like Captain America and Daredevil.
You know who I do remember now that I'm thinking about it? From a couple of the Astonishing Tales, the giant monster, the Colossus.
Oh, yeah.
He kind of sticks out in my mind for like my favorite monster comics, you know? But yeah, the horror comics, I just love the covers of them. They're just amazing.
It's not until recent years that I really like, Batman. I started getting into DC stuff.
So we had this
Batman.
love for comics. We both kind of got out of it in the 80s because things were changing and the writing was lacking. Especially if you grew up in the 70s, things were changing. And so I didn't like the new changes. And I was in college, so I didn't really had my subscription ended when I was in high school. So I got back into it at a flea market. I collected until I was 30. So stopped in 93, and I had 4 boxes, 1,150 comics. Then 3 years ago, almost 3 years ago, I go to a flea market, and the guy selling the comics is the same inventory from an elderly couple I used to buy comics from in my hometown, Peekskill. And the clerk told me he was from Peekskill, and that it was their inventory. So I started buying again, told this guy I was buying comics. He starts buying, but he had been buying dribs and drabs for a while,
for
right?
the last decade or so, yeah. I actually went through a period in like the early 2000s for like 2 or 3 years where I started buying a ton of stuff, and then I stopped.
All the
again.
newer stuff, right? Or
No, it was the older stuff. Yeah,
Okay.
It was the older stuff, and then I stopped again for like 8 years or so until when he was saying then.
So it's like a
nonstop.
disease.
It's like a total disease. Yeah.
So I've been going off the handle this past month and a half, and then I just with the night that Stan Lee passed away, I went crazy and spent a big order online. Plus all the money I've been spending at comic conventions this past 3 years. I've been really bad with spending, but I'm looking at it as kind of like an investment. I'm hoping, But it was Pete's idea to do the show, and one day he had asked me in a text if I would be interested in co-hosting a talk show about comics because he already does this with music.
Yeah, I got to see a Tranquility channel, which has become very, very popular. And I said, it's great. I love talking about music, but
so I thought
love
about
comics
it
so much. I was like,
I thought about it, and I know Pete's a compulsive guy. That if we're going to go into this is going to become a fucking baby. This thing, and it has. So I said, you have to come up with a name for this show. So he had, he had the words comic book in it, but there's so many words that come after the word comic book that have been taken.
Yeah.
But you want people to know it's a comic book show, and we're in our 50s, so I thought, why not?
Yeah, we didn't want to hide that, and we're talking about older stuff here. It's like,
So I said, why not come up with comic book geezers? And he liked the sound of it. He's like, I think we'll run with that. I'm like, it's a name we can grow into, and it's not taken yet. Yeah. So let's jump on it before somebody else takes it. Yeah. So we're comic book geezers, and we started.
So we haven't even talked about how we met. So that's.
I was going to say we started in July of 2017. It was his idea.
Yeah.
And I named the show, and
so a year and a half into it, right?
Yes. And we've got almost 80 videos now.
Is it that many?
Yeah, high 70s. I saw we have 170 subscribers is the last I saw.
Yep.
So thank you for watching and all your views. So yes, we met in college in 1985, late 85,
84 actually.
Oh yeah, I wasn't talking to you then. I didn't really know.
No, we knew each other then. Though. Yeah, we knew
a little bit.
Yeah.
Saw this guy's face on campus. then it was like you were friends with somebody else I was friends with, and that kind of brought us even closer together, spending time.
Yep.
So we both went to college. That's where we met. So we've known each other, 34 years? I was thinking 32, 33 years, 34.
Well, since either late 84 or early 85. So it's, yeah.
Okay.
It's a
So
long
if we
time.
go by early 85, so it's 33 years.
Yeah. So a long
So
time.
yeah.
Long time.
And we didn't know that each other liked comics until one day he was sitting on the couch moping.
Because I had no money. I wanted to buy some beer.
And he was like, yeah, I'm tired of selling my comics for beer money. I was like, what? I was like, I didn't know you were into comics.
I made the mistake of, because where my parents lived, my house, was about maybe a half hour, 40 minutes from where we were going to college. So I went back to go visit one weekend, and I grabbed like a whole box full of comics, and I brought them back, and I would bring them down to the local comic shop
store in New Paltz,
and to get like nothing for them.
And get fleeced.
Yeah, get fleeced. So
thanks for bringing me these gems.
And you know, Spider-Man 129. What was I thinking?
That,
He's got it. Now
well,
I don't have it.
I have it than the comic book store guy.
True. But I think it would be better if I still had it.
It would, yes, of course. But it's still in good hands. It's been taken care of. Yeah, I
would think most of the stuff that I probably unloaded, I've actually.
So I gave this guy like a $20 bill for like 10 Spider-Mans, and they were all Spider-Mans I needed. It was like an awesome hookup. It's like my Hail Mary Holy Grail
That'll
store.
never happen again.
No,
right?
It won't. I got like 10 awesome Spider-Mans that today were probably worth $300-400 a piece. The Death of Gwen Stacy, the first Punisher, the Luke Cage battle that you like, I think 123.
No, I didn't give you that one. I've kept that
one. The one after the second Man Wolf 125.
Man Wolf, yeah.
The one with him and Harry Osborn on the cover was that 136 or 137.
Yep.
I think Mysterio too with the head coming off in the other
probably.
one.
So
awesome
classic stuff that I
129 the Punisher, which is probably a 2, a good condition or a poor condition. You know, like on a scale of 1 to 10, it's down there like a 2. But I took it into the comic shop in Peekskill when the people were still alive, and the guy's name was Donnie, and I asked him to appraise it for me because I was a customer there for a couple of years. This is in the early '90s, and he said I would ask $70 for this book if it was in my store. I go, $70? It's so beat up. He's like, yeah, that's why, because it's beat up. If it was in good shape, I'd be asking $300. And that was like back in like '92.
Yeah, now you multiply that by 4, right? So
yeah,
it's crazy.
You got to spend $800 for a decent Punisher minimum, right?
Yeah,
it's crazy. A bad Punisher, you're spending $300-400. This book that I have is probably worth $300. I could probably get away with asking $500 for it, and conceivably get it because it's so highly desirable.
Yep.
But anyway,
so we went to school together. He graduated, then I graduated, and we stayed good friends. And
we're not far apart from each other, like 45 minutes apart.
We were roommates for a couple of years in
after
the 90s.
College, never in college.
No, after college, and we always lived pretty close to each other. And he's now like 8 minutes from here, and our journey just keeps continuing.
So we're doing the comic things. I did try something recently. I tried to get my foot in the door with Orange County Choppers, and that didn't work out because I'm not famous and I didn't offer them any money. But Paul Jr. has his own shop, and I stopped in there one day. He's got this awesome Spider-Man chopper that they made, I guess, from the first show. The clerk was really nice, and he knows them, obviously, and I asked the clerk if I could get my foot in the door and come in there and tape a show, and they said no. I asked them to be in it. I actually talked to Mike. He was a good guy. When I called back 2 weeks later, the clerk never gave my comic book geezers card to them. But I was trying to do an episode.
Just trying to give them exposure to show off their bike.
Also trying to do a different. Yeah. I thought you viewers might like that if we sat down in front of a Spider-Man chopper and talked about it and flashed off a couple of Spider-Man comic books. I think it's a great concept for the show. Would have been even more awesome if we could have Mikey and Paul Jr. in it to talk about the making of the bike. But they didn't want to do it. Paul said no.
So I tell you what, if you're watching this and you think that would be a good idea, get in touch with them however you can and let them know.
Yeah, tell them they dropped the ball on letting local talent get promoted. It would have been, they don't need our promotion, obviously. They don't need our PR. But I did ask Mike, but it was Paul's shop where I wanted him to do it. And anyway, I tried, guys. I did try.
That's all we can do, right?
But we don't do just basic stuff. We try a couple of different ideas to keep you guys on the edge of your seat.
That's
so anyway, we thank you for watching Comic Book Geezers. And I keep telling you I'm an unknown comic. And I do have a comic video. If you want to check it out, it's called Wild Bill Impressions. You got to put a little hyphen, a little minus sign, Wild Bill hyphen Impressions. Check it out on YouTube.
Cool. And if you guys are into music at all, specifically like all forms of heavy metal, hard rock, progressive rock, jazz, fusion, I run a great talk show over on Sea of Tranquility Prague here on YouTube, and that's a lot of fun too. So
check it
a
out.
lot of good stuff.
Wild Bill hyphen Impressions. Check it out. Thanks for watching, guys. I'm Wild Bill saying thanks for being here with Comic Book Geezers. We'll see you next time.
And I'm Pete. Take care.
See ya.